So I'm sitting here 20 miles from Black Sky Racing and car broke down right on the side of 94, so I pulled out behind the guardrail. There's a big hole in my radiator. All of a sudden started smelling coolant and my lights came on. Wasn't overheating or nothing, but it smelled coolant. I was like, oh shit. So I'm sitting here waiting for him to come with the car trailer, and still gonna rebuild the transmission today. Yeah.
What this has got is it's got your bypass built into it with a ball and a spring in there to keep it from draining back when you let it sit. So that's cool. This is your second gear servo. It prevents a whole lot of leaks, mainly between the second and third gear circuit.
Okay.
This cover here provides your main third gear leak cover solution, which we do have that separate right here to use with the stock servo. It's just a cover with an O-ring in it, because what they rely on from the factory is a machine fit between the cover and the pin. So a lot of times that's worn right out. So what we do is we throw this guy in there with the O-ring to seal it up on all builds, and then when we get into the more extreme builds, we get into this guy, like I say, because we get more apply surface area on the servo piston. So actually, same pressure produces more apply pressure to the band. Now because of that though, we actually run two different types of bands. Regular servo covers on a manual valve body, because it's a higher pressure, we'll run this band here. And the reason we don't run this one with the billet servo is this one's actually only got 8 spot welds on it. And what happens, we get too crazy, you'll literally peel them spot welds off. And this one here has 10.
Okay.
So it's amazing what 2 extra spot welds does, but it's the difference between ripping the spot welds out and not. A lot of people claim, oh, use a billet band, rigid band. The problem with that is they don't flex properly. They don't stretch around the drum right. So you really only get apply here and up here on them instead of across the whole band. So I don't like those. Suncoast likes them, I don't. Along with a lot of other builders don't like them. But Suncoast loves them, and because of that, there's a lot of other builders, smaller builders, that buy into the hype of them. Completely unnecessary. It's a $300 band in the first place that, like I say, doesn't even perform as well as a flex band. So the main thing you got to do as far as making sure second gear is going to apply is, like I say, take care of that cover, and then the factory levers are cast and they like to break. So we like to put in, especially if we're going to go with that billet servo, we always, absolutely, every time with that servo, we go with a billet 4.2 lever. The TCS products, I'll grab one here. This is the wedge. Factory one is cast. And it likes to split out and you lose second gear. No good. Not at all. And then, like I say, this is the apply lever itself. This is a billet TCS piece, 4.2 ratio. Factory ratio is 3.8. So you get a little increase in apply pressure just from this. And what happens with the stock ones, and I'll find it here in a little bit, but it literally breaks this loop out. And then you lose second gear. Once again, this lever literally falls right off. And then a spongy 1-2 shift is usually caused by this guy. This guy actually runs on the lever to apply the force from the lever to the band, and as you can see, it's pretty flimsy stamped steel. Stock builds, I'll laminate them just to save on cost, but for the more extreme builds, we again turn to TCS. We go with this nice heavy duty billet piece here. Cheap insurance with these 2 pieces here on keeping second gear, let alone the increase in apply pressure going up in ratio, and then this just actually firms up, crisps up the shift so you don't get that long shift. There's other ratios out there other than 4.2. They do have 5.0 out there that not a lot of people really like to play with. That actually comes factory in the 48 RE. Problem with that is we actually run into issues with a bind up on the 2-3 shift almost every time. And what happens, you end up in 2 gears at once, and it makes your intermediate shaft very unhappy. Now we're really going to be pushing the limits of this guy. These are spendy pieces. The only place I can get them from is TCS, but this planetary is an aluminum spline on the output shaft. Guys have pushed them in the lockup ones to some pretty serious horsepower, but I've also had Like that guy over there has literally stripped the splines out of these with a 318. So, you know, it's hit or miss. Part of the reason why a 2-3 handoff is kind of mushy is right here. Should be able to see a little bit of wave in that guy.
Yep.
What that does, that literally promotes slip. So you don't get a crisp shift. All because mom wants to take the truck and go get groceries. They don't want crisp shifts anymore. These go right in the scrap heap.
Yep.
We replaced that with a solid ring. This waffle here, these grooves really do actually help evacuate the fluid that's flowing between the clutches so that they apply more crisply. Also gives it a little more grab just from that little area there. It's actually one of the clutches that we usually see. It's got the most heat in it, and that's the only discoloration as far as steels go. So she was doing okay. Must have been a pretty stock motor.
Yeah. Only 77,000 miles too.
Oh, yeah. That explains a little bit too.
Yeah.
It's kind of not the norm for me to see a transmission that's actually healthy.
Right?
Every once in a while you get a kid, they'll buy a truck and they budget transmission right in the purchase price, and before they do anything to it, they'll bring me the truck. It's rare though. The forward clutch actually, it takes abuse when you start turning them up, but as far as a stock truck goes, this is not a shifting clutch. The only time this clutch does anything for applying or releasing is when you go from neutral to drive, park drive. This applies immediately as soon as you go into drive. This gives you all your forward gears, hence why they call it the forward clutch. You know, when you're in reverse, this one's not applied clearly, and so it doesn't have any handoffs. This clutch sees issues mainly, you know, because it's a handoff. You know, you've got the second gear band around it that has to release, boils down to that lever ratio I was talking about earlier. You have to release the second gear band from around this drum in time before this direct clutch applies. So it's a shifting clutch. It's got to actually take all the momentum of the engine and completely switch directions of the sun shell and everything inside the transmission all in an instant. And yet they decided to put that wave reaction ring in there. So, you know, they're promoting slip. It's already got a hard life, and then people turn the power up, and these like to melt. I have seen so many of these clutches melted, fried, welded together, to the point that they literally, because those splines from those actually run here, I've literally seen countless input shafts that have been ruined by wrecked direct clutches. Usually when I do a build in a lockup unit, we're getting a billet input shaft anyways, so the fact that they mess up these splines here is of no consequence as far as increased cost, but it does make for awesome carnage. So, pretty pictures. Usually we see those much nastier. That magnet's usually about an inch thicker than what it is there. They're usually very pretty inside. Normally we can use a different clutch and actually get 5 in there without any of this machine work, but because it's a little higher horsepower output, we're actually going to do it with thicker clutches because they take the heat better. What we do is we just have these plates machined to give us a little extra clearance to get that extra clutch and steel in there to go from a 4-disc to a 5. You know, in our bigger builds we can switch around, play with clutch thicknesses, and we can actually fit 6 in there with this. Or if we go to a full out build, we actually get a billet drum from TCS that's got a bigger apply piston in it, billet apply piston that applies 45% more pressure due to the apply surface area. And that one, even using this pressure plate, we can actually get 6 in. So we get these in there, we can actually get 7 and 8. We don't normally necessarily need that many. We can put this in the forward and get 5 in there, but it gets really tricky, and we have to play around with end plays and stuff like that to make sure all 5 clutches stay on those splines if we stack 5 in there. Oh, you'd be kidding me. Those jerks. 727s are supposed to have the aluminum one. Call Transstar and put that on the night run too. Yeah, what literally happens, as you'll see, is this section of this accumulator piston literally separates from the center bore, or just flat splits. You know, they just got too much line pressure, honestly, especially after a shift kit, to trust this plastic one at all. Now another Achilles heel is this piston. When the band gets out of adjustment, gets very unstable in the bore. Has no support whatsoever really. What it does is it cocks in the bore and it'll break the piston and then you lose reverse. The other thing that happens is this aluminum pin, usually up here around the top, gets too much pressure from the spring under it and it'll literally start to separate here, pop off. And that doesn't really affect reverse as far as it still applies, but it's rough. It's very rough apply when that breaks. You lose this cushion from the spring. You know, ultimately in the full manual you're going to end up with a little rougher apply anyways, because we're actually should be putting a bushing in there to make up to where this spring doesn't hardly do anything to dampen it. So the gap on the sealing ring on this cover is pointed that way. So I do my best to make sure the gap on this snap ring is pointed the opposite direction. It actually helps seal it. You know, make sure that they're, number one, they're not dry the first time they try to apply so they don't burn up, but they actually swell a little bit. That one shouldn't be too bad. Those are a resin soaked paper. Ooh. Alright, so we're at 95, so that's excessive. We can do one of two things. We can either put a thicker selective snap ring in there, or we can put a couple of these thicker steels back in. This is my tool for working the seals on without cutting them or rolling them. This tool is probably older than me. I actually got it from my dad from when he worked building transmissions for GM at the dealerships. Really, literally all it is a 10 thousandths feeler gauge on a stick. You know, to replace that, they started to send this guy with. And you're supposed to just be able to put him in and roll him around, and you know, it's supposed to be the best thing since sliced bread. I tried it once, immediately cut a seal and threw it in the trash. So what I've run into before is you'll have issues with the front planetary here, and it will actually, especially even if they don't get the right thrust washers in here, they can actually literally start to cut the fingers off of this spring. We'll also see them where when they do weld this clutch, there gets to be enough heat in this spring, you'll see it blues, in which case it loses its ability to act as a spring, takes the temper out of it, and you throw it in the trash, get a new one. For those guys that get really in-depth in these things and actually are like figuring out the shift kits and stuff like that,
oh, like modifying,
they know exactly what each piece of those little brain corals do. You know, and my dad was actually one of those guys at one point in time in like a 700 R4. He knew exactly what each passage did. And it's insane to think that, you know, you can get that detailed in the knowledge on them.
So what, are they just like try and machine them out to get better? Is that something that people do or no?
In some cases, what we do is we drill through one and purposely cause a cross leak to feed oil into a passage that, like, say, or block one off, stuff like that, to get oil where we need it sooner or later. You know, like should be holes we have to drill in here to help with the full manual to make sure that the governor pressure is where we want it at all times, to make sure that it shifts every time. You know, if we were to take you out in like a regular automatic and you downshift, not all the time are they going to downshift. You know, because there's certain feeds and passages in here that will actually, if the governor pressure is too high, they will not allow the downshift to occur. And You know, so we kind of tricked that. A little bit of that is what we're going to do with the one governor plug. Budget lathe. One thing you never do, never ever wipe the valve body surface, at least a final wipe, with a rag. Too much lint, and the machine surfaces are really, really quick to pick up said lint. Alright, so we changed out the check balls with DELRIN. As what you can see happens. This one isn't bad because it's a low mileage unit, but you can see these holes where the check balls ride and oscillate actually get kind of peened out because of the fact it's steel on steel. So the DELRIN prevents that peening of this plate and actually also seals up better. So
is that like a hard plastic or what is it?
Yeah, yep, it's a hard plastic. Yep.
Cool.
I say it seals up better, and then this plate survives a lot longer because of it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword on the reasons why you want to replace them when you get into these older valve bodies that are steel check balls. They use the steel check balls as late as '95 actually. So unless they've been rebuilt, then most people that at least know what they're doing will replace them with DELRIN. There's a little more in the overdrive, you know, simply because I got to do more in the bottom. There's a whole nother. Like literally this part of the valve body is the same, there's just a whole nother layer down here that they add on that controls the lockup and overdrive. So there's a little bit we gotta do in there, especially if we want second gear lockup. I actually have to literally JB weld passage shut.
Woohoo!
Valve body.
Which means we get to drink beer.
Yep.
Yep.
So.
Woohoo!
Presents from a faraway land.
What time is it?
11:30.
11:30.
11:30.
They're supposed to be gone already, damn it!
That's level 3. It's a lot harder. It makes it almost as hard as steel.
What I have to do is I gotta set the, I can actually do it with pretty much just this. I gotta roll the band in and get the one end of the band down there. Shaft end play is a little excessive. There's a pair of selective thrust washers in there. I'm gonna put little thicker ones in there. It's not much, maybe 20 thousandths,
Oh, yep.
but it's enough. Between this one and the other one being 20 thousandths difference, it'll make me happier. 40 thousandths out of that end play is better. stock one would not have held pressure for nearly that long.
You setting that?
It's actually the way SONNAX suggests, and it works really nicely. For, you know, you get into these different ratios and stuff, and you can't really go by the book because the book actually is trying to get you to a certain amount of servo travel before the band applies. So ultimately what it boils down to is what you want is between 380 and 400 thousandths between the end of the pin and the end of this lever when you pull tension up against it. And that just so happens to be about the thickness of the mechanic's finger. So it has proven to work quite well. Otherwise, we actually did used to fight a lot with getting these bands adjusted right so you didn't have a nasty 2-3 bind up. We're updating the pan. It's the stock pan here. I'm not sure exactly what we do with the filter, but it's an open element filter from the factory on these. We're going to update to this pan, a little deeper. The reason it's deeper is this is a thicker filter setup here. It's gasketed to the block. In the block I actually installed a gasket between that and the valve body to where the only place that this valve body can pull fluid is off the bottom of the filter here on the bottom of the pan. So there's absolutely no way to get any air in there like when you're going around corners or anything silly like that. Otherwise you get a quart low and you take a corner nice and spiritedly, and you will literally lose line pressure and the transmission will flare out on gear.
Nice.
This solves that. Quart in the converter, and you put 5 quarts in the pan, start it in neutral with the wheels off the ground, and add another 4 or 5 quarts, and then start checking it from there as you add it until you get up to, they can be tricky. They'll run fluid up one side of the stick, but not all the way across, so it's not quite reading right yet.